What will become of PBS? The public broadcasting service has been operating in the United States for 55 years. It is a commercial-free service with more than 350 member stations and is known for iconic programs like Sesame Street, Nova, Frontline, PBS News Hour, Washington Week, and Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, to name a few.
PBS is a cultural fixture, a place of rare independent voices and high-quality documentaries, and it is under fire. PBS has been funded, at least in part, by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, but the Trump administration is cutting that funding to PBS and NPR, National Public Radio.
So what does that mean for those beloved programs and services? Today, we're going to find out what PBS really is, how it works, and what these cuts mean not only for its survival, but for voices independent of corporate backing. We've got an expert guest to help us understand all of that. But first, Scott Colby. He's a journalist with 36 years of experience as a reporter, a columnist, editor, and photographer and designer, as well as a national best-selling author and the creator of the Coach Colby Writing Academy. You can visit his website, coachcolby.me, for a free insider's cheat sheet on how to write effective op-eds. Scott has never worked at PBS.
And he is Craig Colby, who has 37 years experience in broadcasting. He's an award-winning executive producer and author and owner of Colby Vision, a video production and consulting company. Craig Colby has never worked at PBS, but our guest today has. Ed Hersh is a veteran media executive who's held senior roles at ABC News, A&E, and Discovery. Now, through StoryCentric, the consultancy he founded, he advises networks and production companies in the US and Canada, including PBS, on how to bring multi-platform content to life, always with an eye on how stories actually reach and resonate with audiences. Based in New York City, Ed also teaches courses on the rapidly changing media business at his alma mater, Syracuse University. Go Orange.
Yes, sir. Go Orange.
I've known Ed for 20 years, consider him a mentor. He's been a good friend, and he knows the business as well as anybody. So let's just get right into it.
Sure.
Ed, so people, they now know who the three of us are. What is your relationship with PBS?
Oh, well, you know, and I'm suddenly, of course, I have a little frog in my throat, so pardon me.
That's how we roll here on Brothers Media.
No. This is great. People enjoy watching me drink. My relationship with them is I've had a consultancy, and for 15 years, on and off, I have consulted with various parts of PBS, especially WNET, which is their flagship station in New York. And, you know, I've helped them with some of their programming initiatives. So it's important to, you know, and advise them on some of the changing business models. But by no means do I speak for them, but I just have a sort of inside view of how they work. And I have great admiration for them. And they're going through a very difficult period now.
Now, before we go much further, in Canada, we have a government-funded broadcaster, CBC. Britain has the BBC. The government-funded broadcaster in the United States is PBS. Doesn't operate in the same way that BBC and CBC does. What is PBS?
Well, what PBS is sort of a little more democratized than BBC or CBC. BBC is I think, pretty fully government funded, and pretty fully government funded, and the CBC is pretty fully government funded as well. PBS is a little bit different in the sense that the government was providing a big chunk of funding, but a lot of that funding came independently from foundations, from individual donors. And by the way, interestingly, since we're based in Canada here talking about this, among the biggest donors to some of the PBS stations in Washington State, for example, are Canadians, and because they enjoy the programming. So it's not fully funded, which is and what has happened to PBS is as many people know, right? They have a melange of programmings, right? There's independent documentaries, there's news, but there's also acquired programming. Masterpiece Theater from the UK, Sesame Street, kids programmings, and the federal government supplied probably, I think, 15 or 20% of their funding for PBS. Now, what's interesting is, and I want to make sure I have a couple of notes on. I want to actually consult them so I know that I'm speaking correctly. Okay, it's more than 330 local PBS stations make up PBS. They are independent, unlike, again, CBC and BBC. They are independently owned and operated, but they collaborate with PBS to distribute national programming, and they share resources. So the station in New York is different than the station in Philadelphia. It has its own board, run by its own people. They produce programming, but they also distribute programming. So it's kind of a crazy Middle Eastern bazaar of selling and trading programs. But the bottom line is Congress, through the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, provides funding for not only PBS, but for National Public Radio. And it had long been a target of right-wing Republicans to send a message that, the government shouldn't be funding this, and they're too liberal, and Frontline is too liberal. And that's been out there a lot, and they're all for years. And it was always on a Republican wish list to get rid of PBS funding or to cut it significantly. And there was always there was always lobbying by these different local stations and by PBS saying, wait a minute, you want to cut Big Bird's budget? You want to fire Mr. Rogers? Okay, you want to get rid of local news and local emergency management alerts? And so they would make a big deal out of that, of saying we want to cut it, and then quietly the money would come back. So that's been around for a while. What the Trump administration did, and they're almost, let me be generous, their iron grip on the Republicans in Congress basically said, not only do we want to cut PBS's budget, which is usually set 2 years out, because anybody, and as you guys know in our business, that if you commission, if you say we're going to do great performances or an American Masters or a Nova, and you say it today, and I have no way to make this thing stop.
That's okay.
But
Just keep rolling.
But I'm going to try. There's something called, I have the right word, rescission. It's a congressional term. So usually it's funded 2 years out. So they know they can commission these shows. What they did this year, which they've never done before, not only did they say we're not giving PBS through this Corporation for Public Broadcasting any more money, we're going to claw back the money we promised them. So all of a sudden, it's not 2 years out anymore. It's right now. We're not going to give you the money we promised you for the next 2 years. And that's unprecedented. So what that means is that the programs that are sort of in the pipeline now that are being produced, they've sort of been bought and paid for. They will continue to roll out. But a whole bunch of programs, okay, are either they're going to cut the amount of programs they make, what a season is, or they're going to eliminate them altogether. Now, as you mentioned, okay, some of and as we've been talking about, it's not fully funded by the government. So what the PBS stations are doing now is they're going around and raising additional money from, they're going to their donors and they're going to foundations, and they're saying, these programs are important. Okay, you need to step up more, at least for the next couple of years until to see if there's a change in Congress so we can keep going. But for now, the impact is tremendous. If I can add one more thing here, the impact is especially felt in some of the places that need it most. In New York, L.A., Washington, Boston, probably Seattle or Chicago. Those are big stations in big cities that have a large donor base of often affluent donors. If in those cities they can go out and raise money, they can do it. But some of the PBS stations are in very small places. They're in rural America. The license is held by a university, and the board is from the university. And there's just no money to do those things. So there's tremendous amount of layoffs. There's tremendous amount of agita and uncertainty. They're trying to raise money elsewhere, but it's pretty clear PBS, the central programming part, PBS, its central office, just laid off, I think, again, I want to be accurate here. Because I checked this sort of up to the minute, that the immediate impact for PBS now, 15% of their workforce has been laid off. That's 35 people, and they eliminated 100 positions total. It's a 21% revenue loss. Okay, it slashed their operating budget, which are the deep costs, and they've completely frozen hiring and halted raises for everyone. And the Corporation for Public Broadcasting said, we're done. We have since we have no money to distribute, we're essentially closing down. There'll be there'll be an answering machine and a phone, and that's what'll be there. And since it was terminated, that you can't do any long-term planning. They can't even say, okay, we're going to hold back in 2 years. We're going to do this, because there's no way to plan, because they don't know they don't have any money even to develop programs. So it's pretty bad.
Do you think the PBS stations, how do you see this playing out in the next, we're waiting for a new Congress, right? Will it survive till then? Will some of these smaller ones have to close and only the big ones will survive? Is that what we're looking at?
Yes, and yes, and yes. Okay. Probably the system will survive. And as I said, in the bigger cities, the PBS stations, they're not going to go to, bars and tone on the air or a test pattern. They will run more out of their library. There will be fewer new programs. They won't do as much. They're not going to go off the air. Where it's really impacted is in local programming, right? Mm-hmm. So that you can rerun last year's Masterpiece Theater, okay, and it won't get that. And they don't work on ratings, but the stations will not go dark. But it's you Scott, in the beginning, you used to talk about independent voices. That's where many people feel the biggest casualty is in some of these small states, rural states that are what we call here news deserts, areas where there are no local newspapers left. The television stations aren't very good. The local TV stations are far away, and they are corporate owned by some company that owns 750 TV stations. In many cases, the National Public Radio and the PBS stations were the only sources of independent news. And as you alluded to in the beginning, that is where this is probably going to be felt the most. Also, so some of these local stations may actually, for all practical purposes, go off the air. And again, I'm just checking my notes here because
by the off the air functionally, I'm guessing what you mean is they'll still have Sesame Street and these other things, but as far as any local content,
no.
You mean they'll be gone?
Because it takes money to keep those going, right? You worked at a TV station. It's not just a show, right? There's master control. There's somebody running all that programming. Somebody has to keep the lights on, and according to the reports I read, up to 80 NPR stations, may shut down. Similar for the PBS stations, especially in Native American, indigenous and rural communities. So it is truly, and some of this is an existential threat. Again, not in the big cities, but you could argue in those big affluent cities, we could afford to get Netflix and to subscribe to different services and CNN. But if you're out in the plains of the prairie or in the deep South, and there are no other news sources, it's pretty dire for those stations.
Yeah, we've seen that in Canada as well. Not so much with more with newspapers, just folding up in all these small towns. Yeah, in small cities.
Yeah,
and we've seen with broadcasters where the small town that shuts down gets the news from the next bigger town, and those newsrooms will try to cover it, but essentially throw a bone to whatever the biggest thing they can get in there. And so what the impact of that is if you've got a local government that is corrupt or plain shady, it's very hard for anyone to find out about it except by word of mouth.
And similarly, okay, think about on a larger scale, other than 60 Minutes, okay, what other, and again, look at the corporate takeover of 60 Minutes, and big changes clearly are coming to CBS, Paramount, CBS News. We don't know exactly what they'll be yet, but they're sort of ominous signs. Okay, Frontline. Okay, where else? There used to be CBS Reports and NBC White Paper and ABC Close Up. Well, they're all true crime shows now, right?
Yeah.
And so now, okay, Frontline it used to get money from Corporation for Public Broadcasting. They also get a lot of foundation money and individual support. But that kind of investigative reporting that they do at Frontline, okay, is expensive. And are they going to have to, unclear now, are they going to have to do less of those, or what other subjects going to change? But again, to your point, investigative reporting, corruption, sort of going against the grain is expensive.
Yeah. Do you think, barring, say, a new Congress and restoration of funding, I mean, I'm thinking about like how much money does it cost to run these operations? And I think about all these billionaires, American billionaires, who, Bill Gates has promised to give away half of his fortune, and Warren Buffett and these guys, they could easily, I mean, it's not their responsibility, but they could easily step forward and fund these.
But you know what? We've seen that how many of those are truly altruistic,
right? And
how many of those have we seen? Look, Jeff Bezos was supposed to save the independence of the Washington Post, right?
Yeah.
He has not. Okay. Elon Musk, the richest guy in the world, he's going to take over Twitter. He doesn't have to make money at it, right? No. Okay. He's using it politically.
As a weapon.
Ellison, who's taking over the Paramount. Okay. Many of these guys have political agendas that they are going to use so that this whole idea that is almost anachronistic. We said, all you need is like a rich guy like Bezos or the Sulzberger family that owns. But as we've seen, many of these family-owned news dynasties, the children or the heirs, they're not that interested in it, so they sell it off to a hedge fund, right? Yeah. And that's what's happening in local television too, on the commercial side, right? They're not interested in winning, DuPont or Emmy Awards. They're interested in they've made this huge investment, leverage investment. They want to make their money back, and news is expensive.
Mm. And one of the things we're talking about here, what Scott brought up, is this big money corporate investment in news. That seems to be the biggest complaint we're hearing from both sides. That one of the things the left and right can agree on is they do not like the corporate ownership of news, so they do not trust news sources, which leaves us to quote unquote independent journalists that we see online, which, as Scott and I have discussed many, many times, do not have the checks and balances that we see in a regular newsroom. They can be independent voices and not controlled, but that doesn't mean they don't have an agenda and aren't influenced. So that brings us back to these independent voices on NPR and PBS that have funding, can run proper newsrooms, and can do proper checks and balances, and can do proper journalism. What happens when they go away?
Well, I think you see what happens when they go away. It's pretty easy. They are going away. Okay, so it's the wild, wild west, and again, encouraged by, I would say, probably more by the right wing than the left. You see, right wing bloggers and conspiracy theorists now invited to some of the Trump press conferences.
Yeah.
Okay,
they have access to the White House now.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And so that's the whole idea, right? That are there, in the first Trump term, I think it was his campaign manager said somebody confronted her and she said, well, no, these are alternate facts.
Alternate facts, yeah.
Alternate facts. Yeah. So this sort of fact-based journalism is not about independent. Yeah, sure. The blogger, the right-wing blogger, spouting conspiracy theories on YouTube from his couch. Okay, you could say he's an independent voice, but are they trusted sources? It's not, Scott. I would argue it's not independent voice. I mean, as long as you got YouTube and podcasts and X, there are a billion, independent voices. How many of those are Russian bots? Okay, how much of that is disinformation? How much, there's an organization, and I highly suggest people sign up for their newsletter called NewsGuard, which is a company that tracks, I have to know somebody who works there, but it's a company that tracks misinformation and disinformation. And all that stuff, uncovers, and the idea that we have to have a company like that. So it's not so much that this stuff is out there, is that the places that say, come hell or high water, we are only reporting the facts. We are going to vet everything that we put on the air. We have trusted journalists who are going to, call it the way they see it. That's what's kind of disappearing. And if you look at the PBS News Hour, they've always tried to do that, right? And it's not flashy. They're not fancy graphics or anything else. They're just sort of telling it like it is. NPR has tried to do that. Frontline has tried to do that. And as those get whittled away, right, all this noise kind of fills the vacuum.
Okay, so tell me, Ed, before I crawl under my bed and weep.
I know it's not exactly that.
Why? This is so depressing. But why can't in America? Why doesn't the public demand more? What's going on? Why? It's also there's this willful ignorance going on with this huge part of the population. What is behind that?
Yes, well, I think that I'm sure the books have yet to be written. Pick up the paper, read every day, or the New York Times, the Washington Post, trying to figure out why this is going on. But it's interesting. In 2008, when Obama ran for the first time and the internet and all the social media stuff was just starting, I went to an interesting breakfast and where Robert Kerry, who was the senator from Iowa, and then later became president of the New School. And the interviewer asked him, it was like a panel discussion, said, what's different about 2008, now this presidential cycle, than before? And he said something that resonates with me every day now. He said, up until now, he says, this is the first election cycle now, he says, where if you're left of center, you can get up in the morning and read the Huffington Post and watch MSNBC at night. Or if you're right of center, you can read Breitbart or the Drudge Report in the morning and watch Fox News at night. And this is what he said, and never come across an idea you disagree with.
Right.
He said, news has become a series of affinity groups.
Right.
Okay. It's not what they say. It's you identify. Fox is an affinity group. Fox has a huge audience. 40% of the people millions of people every night watch Fox News. They, for example, are not covering the Epstein story. Period. End of story. Because it might make Trump look bad. Mm-hmm. MSNBC will never say that Trump did anything well or had a good idea. And so it's become very tribal. And so CNN, which tries to be down the middle, and the News Hour tries. The thing is that the News Hour doesn't rely on ratings.
Right.
CNN,
Mhm.
the commercial rely on ratings. So if you look, CNN is now the poor third-rated network now because they're trying to cover both sides, and it's not working because the left of center audience says, "Oh, they just have a bunch of right-wing stooges on," and the right-wing audience says, "Oh, they don't like Trump." So that's what's happening to news here because we don't have the tradition of a BBC or a CBC. Yes, it's government supported, but you've had the National, you've had the Newsnight, all these programs that have a great tradition of fact-based straight journalism that are centrally operated. We don't have that here.
But also up here we have, especially on the right-wing side, people trying to say that the CBC is just controlled by the Liberal government. We had Simon Dingley on there talking about that specifically. So there is always some sort of...
Well, that's the world we live in now, right? If you don't like something, if some is their bias, they're lying, it's misinformation, and that's the world we live in. It's somebody described it as a post-truth environment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just saw the other day that, I think yesterday, Trump now wants to ban advertising by like drug companies, right? I'm not a big fan of the drug companies, but if you look at like CNN, I watch CNN every day. Drug ads dominate, right? Sure. Drug ads and how to get money out of your reverse mortgage with Tom Selleck. I see that as a direct attack on CNN's funding.
No, but if you watch CBS, if you watch Blue Bloods, that's the ads too. If you watch the evening news, that's not so much an attack on them as it's a demographic story, right? Who's watching tells you more people watching linear television. And people over 65, right? Yeah. And it's an attack on Fox News as well because they're taking a lot of that. So we'll see if that happens or if that is more symbolic than anything else, or there are more, and if you talk to a lot of doctors, they would agree. They're constantly besieged by somebody walking in and asking, is Trump-fire right for me? As your doctor.
I read, not to get off topic, but I did read an article, I think in the New York Times, about how do drug ads, do they have a public service? And they said no, they have no public value.
So, but the whole other issue. The thing about public television is, right, they don't have those commercial pressures.
Yeah.
They don't have ratings pressure. Yeah. And so that's why it's been kind of an antidote to, Craig and I both worked in cable with commercials and subscribers. And the fact is, okay, you lose too many of them and, you go out of business, you get fired. That's where, so you have to, in many ways, you have to go to where the audience is. PBS doesn't, I know the woman who runs Frontline. She's a tremendous journalist, and she always frets when their ratings go down. But she doesn't get fired when their ratings go down. She wants her goal is to make sure as many people watch as they can. So you started to say what I sense, and I know we're going to start running out of time here, but I think the really important thing, so it's not all gloom and doom, what this is forcing PBS to do is to get away from their big station model and all that stuff and pivot to digital sources where there's much better distribution. So just like you'll go to your favorite YouTubers for information or opinion, I know I'm pretty sure at WNET, and I don't have the precise numbers on that, but they did an election series of short interviews with candidates prior to the election locally, and it got thousands and thousands of views, many more views than when they ran them on TV. So I think that what it's forcing them to do, because they were kind of a traditional model with big studios and big shows and big staffs, they're figuring out how to make this digital pivot to a younger audience, an audience that, and the guy who runs WNET says, the audience won't come to us. We
Right.
have to go to the audience.
So we're going to go to YouTube. We're going to go to TikTok. We're going to go.
We want to meet the
Instagram.
audience where they live.
Yeah.
And as one of the most interesting statistics that again gives me a lot of hope, more people are watching YouTube on television on their TV sets than on their devices.
Because the screen's bigger and you're going to sit in your couch and be comfortable.
But it also speaks to the kind of content that's now starting to work on YouTube.
Right.
If on your phone, 3 guys juggling Coke bottles on a treadmill, okay, it's funny, and you don't care that it looks terrible. Right. But if you look at the video quality, like it's almost like 4K or ultra or HD on YouTube now, it's gorgeous. And there are movies on YouTube now. There's longer form documentaries, and YouTube has become, at least in the US, and I think in the UK as well, the number 2 streamer behind Netflix. It's like Netflix, YouTube, and then like Amazon Prime and some other things. So there's that levels the playing field, and levels the playing field in terms of marketing, because the algorithm is pushing shows. So there's a lot of, and that's where the smart, from what talking to various people around PBS, that's where the smart PBS management is going. Go to a lower cost production model, go to digital stuff where we can sort of meet our audience where they live. So I think but it's you want to do that transition over years, not have to do it in, under the gun, and they are obviously under the gun now.
Well, sometimes that's what it takes. And I will just say, it's never been easier to make content. Now, that's what I tell students when I talk to them all the time. It's never been easier to make content now. Like this little journalistic interview show with people with decades of experience in the media is done. I can't say it's for nothing, because I pay for StreamYard and I pay for carriage in different places and some things, but it's done for pretty much nothing.
Right.
And there's no reason. Yeah.
You can watch this on YouTube, folks.
And there's no reason all these other broadcast platforms can't run these same kind of things for very little cost without gigantic.
I just want probably gets a little in the weeds, but one guy who writes about a smart guy who writes about TV says the TV content business is now shaped like a dumbbell. In the big middle, which used to be cable programming and broadcast programming, that's disappearing. And so you either have very cheap content on one end of the dumbbell, and you have very high cost content on the dumbbell. There's it's great that, you can do this for, 15 cents. But the fact is, Dick Wolf can't do Law and Order, an episode of Law and Order, for 15 cents. Okay. Right. And so he's got to sell it to streaming. It's got to be a whole distribution thing. So that's what's happening. The business is bifurcating, so that, but things like, and I think it's interesting that what you're doing here is partially what COVID taught us, which is, 3 guys sitting in their houses or their houses and offices with good video quality. Okay, we don't need a studio with a director and 3 cameras to do an interesting journalistic interview. And look, if you watch cable, if you watch CBC's nightly news, plenty of interviews are now being done, in people's living room. They're not sending a camera crew. So that COVID showed that could be done. Okay. Mm-hmm. And now it's being refined so the smart places are really looking at, what does the future hold? How do you do some of the news and public affairs stuff in a less expensive way, so that you save your resources when if you got to go to Afghanistan, you're saving your money to do that. If you're going to Edmonton, okay, you really can interview the guy from his house.
So just to sum up some of the things that we've talked about, since we're pretty much at the end. So PBS is hurting. They could lose some stations, unlikely to go out of business. They are in the process of learning to reinvent themselves, but they have to do it quickly, because it's not that their budget is cut years out. It's not that their funding from this one source is going away immediately. And that, from our perspective, Ed, that affects people trying to sell them content. but it also affects what people are going to get at home. The hope in all of this is that they will learn to use these new, cheaper tools and new systems and reach audiences in places they weren't going before,
Correct.
off sides of television screen.
And, I think that, the long-term implication of this, you were asking Scott about the long-term implication of this was, the part of it is the sort of collapse of localism. We talked about that. The increased reliance on philanthropy, which is, tough. And also, civic and educational erosion, their role in early learning, because we didn't even talk about the educational programming, that's cut too.
Right.
Okay, civil discourse and emergency communication. So there's there are all sorts of that. But I think that, again, if of the leaders I've talked to in the public broadcasting system, they're taking this as a challenge to say that the PBS brand is highly regarded in the United States. It's among the most trusted brands in the United States, and it is a great producer of programming. They want to take that as a challenge to say, okay, we may have to redefine what this means, but the public loves us, and we'll keep our connection with the public. And in 2 years, when there's a midterm election, we will make sure that people are reminded that who took their PBS News Hour or their local news away, and their NPR station away. So that's what the hope is that this is not the total end of it's clearly going to change everything for a long time to come, but it doesn't change the public's perception of PBS, nor does it change. They got millions of telegrams and messages at Congress. So there's a lot. They were very heartened by the support for PBS by the general population. So nobody is like walking away from this fight.
It's a great brand. Ed, thanks so much. This is the time in the show where Scott and I promote our books.
Where we promote your book? Okay.
So I'm going to start, since this just came out. It's The Unqualified Hockey Coach and Tales of Springsteen, True Love, and How to Be Utopian. It is an inexpensive book that's getting incredible reviews right now. I encourage you to read it. It's really about, through 7 stories, how we influence each other. Scott?
My latest book is a book on how to write op-eds and short memoirs. That's what you think. A practical guide to writing compelling op-eds and short memoirs, which I just said. And in fact, yesterday I sold my first copy in Australia. So it's now been sold in 7 countries.
Was it printed upside down for Australia?
Yeah.
Ed, is there anything you want to promote?
No, since I'm not speaking to the TV audience, my work is mostly B2B. My work is mostly with individually with working with networks and producers in the U.S. and Canada. And I probably should have mentioned more about that. And that's one of the reasons, I knew you, Craig, from our hot docs and stuff like that. And, that's, by the way, one of the other impacts of this. Canadian producers, a big market for Canadian producers was PBS and U.S. networks in general. And so a lot of my time has been spent in trying to help them figure out how do they navigate this new world. So I hope to continue to do that.
Me too. Ed, thank you so much. We're very lucky to have your expertise and wisdom on the show. I've always appreciated it over the years. And for anyone listening, thanks for listening to the show. Support PBS when they have those fund drives. Send the money like we do from Canada, because we love PBS.
Thanks again, and thanks for having me.